was centered around this idea that there was a perfect brother genetically, and then there was a genetically imperfect brother. And they would go out and they'd do this swimming competition. They'd start on shore, and they'd swim out, and they would go until one of them quit. Well, the genetically perfect brother would always win. Until finally one day, the imperfect brother swam past the normal point. They turned around, kept swimming, and finally the perfect brother gave up and almost drowned. His imperfect brother saved him, and they swim back to shore. And they get back, and he says, How did you do that? How'd you do that? And he said, I didn't save anything for the return journey. That is a powerful lesson for us as Christians. Our hope is not in man. Our hope is in Jesus Christ. Amen?
Amen.
But we seem to be running a race like we're saving energy for that return journey. When we need to be running the race full tilt, trusting in the Lord.
Yeah.
Quite often I hear people say, we need to do this, we need to do that. We need to change that to, if God wants me to, I need to do that. My family needs to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, I say that, and I'm going to share a few stories here to start with. World War II, at the end of it, the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA, did a report. And in that report, it's called Persecution of the Christian Church in Nazi Germany. They wanted to find out how it was possible in an ostensibly Christian country the Holocaust happened. How was that possible? And so they did a study. And here was their conclusion. The Holocaust happened because the German government successfully deprived the Christian church from living its Christianity beyond the four walls. That's true. Now, you know, the Apostle Paul told us about this. There was a story. They were on Malta. There was a fire that had been started. The Apostle Paul started to add sticks to that fire. And as he added sticks, the fire got hotter, and a viper came out, fastened to his hand. Now, he lived, but there is an important lesson in that. There is a level of fire in the church where that snake is just perfectly comfortable and doesn't do anything. I want you to hear what I just said. There is a level of fire in the church where that snake is still perfectly comfortable. And it's only when we throw more sticks on that fire and get it hotter, that fire finally comes out. Now, we shouldn't be surprised at that, should we? No. We want the fire to get hotter, don't we? I'm preaching, Pastor, but that's what I'm going to do.
Why does everybody feel like they got to...
I know.
What's up with that?
Yeah, we're in a church. We want that fire to get hotter, don't we?
Amen.
Now, if they start attacking you, that's what snakes do, because we got to heat it up so hot to get the snake out of there. I don't want the snake around, do you?
No.
So let's get that fire hotter and get that snake the heck out of here.
Right.
Why are we afraid of that? The other thing, we talked about identity. Identity. For those who've given their lives to Jesus Christ, He has given us the right to be called sons and daughters of God. Right. Now, why are we walking around? You ever see a prince walking around like this? Oh, no, kings. So difficult. Oh. You don't see a prince or king walking around like that. If you did, you'd be, oh, what's wrong with you? You walk around like a prince. You walk around like a king, like a queen. Sons of the living God. Who are these uncircumcised Philistines to defy the armies of the living God? We need to stand up. Parable of the prodigal son. People always fixate on the prodigal son. Nobody ever talks about his brother. Nobody ever talks about his brother. His brother was in the field doing what he was supposed to be doing. He was bringing in the harvest. He was tending the field. And he's still bitter. And his dad says, you never asked. We need to start asking big. We need to start praying big. We need to start thanking God big. God is going to change this state. God is going to change this country.
Yes.
God is going to change His church and birth something new. In fact, I believe the church as we know it is dying. And God is birthing something new out of it. Amen, He is. Because He's the one that creates. Satan has to counterfeit. Always. And so tonight, I'm going to share the truth with you. Some of you might, I don't really care. But you will not walk out of here and say you didn't know. You will not leave this room and say you didn't know. Now tonight, you can take pictures of some of the slides, okay? But there's only a couple people that are supposed to be recording. I just want to keep it that way. But the slides, yes, you can take pictures of them. There's a few I want you to take pictures of because they have lists of resources, okay? Now, when I was in Iraq, I had the opportunity every afternoon to have tea with Iraqis. I built a relationship with them. One day, one of them pulled me aside. Okay? He pulled the infidel aside because I built a relationship with them, and he said, do you know you're going to heaven? I mean, shocked me. We're in a war zone. I'm wearing battle, you know. You know you're going to heaven? Yeah, man, I do. I know I'm going to heaven. Jesus Christ died for my sins. I have no question in my mind I'm going to heaven. And he started weeping. And he said, I don't. And I got to preach the gospel in a combat zone. So the stuff I'm showing tonight, it's key that we follow a few rules. Okay? Intentional evil exists. We need to be intentional in expanding the kingdom. Amen?
Yes. Amen.
Amen. Number 2, kingdom of Jesus Christ is in our midst or inside of us.
Right.
That means wherever we go, that's the kingdom.
Yep.
Okay? Wherever we go, that's the kingdom. That's important. We don't walk around hunch-shouldered, all not confident. We walk around as sons and daughters of the living God.
Amen.
Spiritual battle that's going on around us manifests in the physical.
Yes.
What I'm going to show you is that physical manifestation so you can recognize it. Also, no fear. I don't need to really say, 310 times or something in Scripture, do not fear. Do you think God wanted us to get that message?
Right. Come on.
Amen. We need to act beyond the 4 walls of the church, and we need to reach the lost. Okay? So when I bring up these folks there, I have some people, I give this to an internship at Hungry Generation, and one of the people's like, that seems like hate. It's not hate. This is reality. We want to reach these people. We've got to understand where they're coming from first.
Yes.
We have to.
Right.
Okay? All right. Christian apathy. Let's start with that. How about, huh? I'm going to give you a lengthy presentation. Okay? This is 3 hours, all right? I will take breaks. But here's the bottom line. Okay? I do this with a PowerPoint presentation because I want to show you the primary source documents so there is no question at all among any of us what's happening. Okay? All right, Christian apathy. That's how many people, what Americans believe right here. Oops. Huh. It's not working. There we go. Took off on me. All right. Born-again Christians. 35% say they're born-again Christians in America. That's what unchurched versus church looks like as far as Americans practicing their faith, 55%. This is how many people identify as Christians officially, 73%. Now you should ask yourself this very clear question. What on earth is happening to our country if 73% are identifying as Christians? Let me answer that question directly. We are not living our faith according to the dictates of Jesus Christ. 75% pray. And then it goes all the way down. You see that? 17%, 18% actually get out and do something. That gets back to what we were just talking about. 10%, maybe it's 20%, whatever. 10, 20%. That's not what Jesus said. He said the whole body of Christ is supposed to get out. What Americans believe. Now, I want to highlight a couple things on here. This is good works result in going to heaven. That's not the gospel. No. Good works result in going to heaven. Over half believe that identify as Christians. Christians have a responsibility to evangelize others. Less than half believe that. We have a disconnect. Complete disconnect. God is all-powerful, all-knowing. Okay? Looking good? Some other view of God, 33%. Okay? Every time we walk outside of the church, we walk outside of our homes, that's a mission field. And I'm going to tell you something else. That includes politics. Okay? When Jesus gave us the command to preach the gospel to all creation, that included politicians. Okay? They are part of creation. All right? When he said to go disciple all the nations, okay, that wasn't all the nations, but don't go to the capitals. Okay? We have to assume that mindset. It is a mission field. In fact, I would argue Olympia is one of the darkest mission fields out there. Washington, D.C. In fact, I would argue further that the pygmies of Africa have been more evangelized than the politicians of Olympia. And you know how I know that? Because I met the lady who's evangelized the pygmies of Africa, so I can say it.
Yeah.
All right. This is very interesting, too. When you die, you will go to heaven because you have confessed your sins. Only 30% believe that. I mean, this is basic stuff. Look at this. Basic. This is even more interesting. Absolute moral truth exists. Only less than half believe that. Less than half. Divorce is not morally acceptable. The Holy Spirit is alive, not just a symbol of God's presence. Only 43% believe that. How can you be a Christian and not have the Holy Spirit? Man, essentially there's no power.
Right.
Unbelievable. Look at that. Separation of church and state does not appear anywhere in the U.S. Constitution. 38% said they didn't know that. And I would bet it's higher if you go to the younger generations.
Right.
And I'm going to get to these here in a second and bust these myths. Well, this is good. Constitutional generated some positive thoughts. So does Christian still. But I want to share something with you. In Olympia this year was the most anti-Christian session I have ever experienced in 10 years down there. That's not hyperbole. I'm talking active persecution. I was hauled into the chief clerk's office because I had a sticker that said Dominion on it. And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Luke 10:19, where Jesus Christ gave us authority over all the power of the evil one," and just stared at him. And he didn't know what to do. Right? I had an ethics complaint filed against me because I'm a representative and I also preach on the mission field. I was in Argentina here a month ago. I was in Ethiopia in November. You know what those pastors are saying? What's going on with you guys up in America? Man, why are you putting in place the stuff we just got rid of?
Right.
We're praying for you.
Right.
Amen.
They know, everybody else knows what's going on, right?
Yeah.
We need to wake up. This is interesting as well in displays of religious symbolism. By generation, you can see the younger generation is effectively turning its back on God. Just one example. 57%, 43%, 62%. Unbelievable. It really is. Liberty, freedom, religious freedom, free exercise. All of these generate positive thoughts, but why, and positive reaction, but why do they believe the other way? Isn't that interesting? So there's, again, a disconnect. Three out of four people oppose bulldozing pre-existing statues, tearing them down, like Robert E. Lee and all these other folks. I think you guys had something at Battleground too, right? Isn't it like a Confederate memorial or something at a campground? Yeah. So people say, no, don't do that, but yet it's still happening. Again, a disconnect. Attacks on religious liberty have increased over double in the last few years. And I'm seeing it this year. The Supreme Court of Washington State just ruled that Arlene's Flowers, okay, that what she did was discriminatory, living out her faith. Even though the state constitution says there's an absolute freedom of conscience in all matters of religious sentiment. And Article 26 of the state constitution says there shall be perfect toleration of religious sentiment. And yet the Supreme Court ruled completely against that, just this last week. So, a bunch of people saying we are not a Christian nation. Have you guys heard this? We are not a Christian. I'm going to prove it to you in 5 minutes. You ready? And you can take a picture of this if you want to. Whereas we all came into these parts of America with one and the same end and aim, namely to advance the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ and to enjoy the liberties of the gospel in purity and peace. The very first governing document that united the colonies that you were never taught in school in 1643 said that in the first line. Huh. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? But it gets even more interesting. Blackstone wrote his commentaries 1765 to 1769, and in those commentaries he defined what is the law of nature and what is the law of nature's God. Now remember, 1769, 1776, so 7 years. Blackstone writes what the law of nature is. What's the law of nature? Well, it's the will of your maker, the truth written into creation. What's the law of nature's God? Holy Scripture. That was English law. The commentaries of the laws of England, that was the preeminent law book for the colonies. And so when Thomas Jefferson put that into the Declaration of Independence, the law of nature and nature's God, he was saying we are founding our country on Judeo-Christian principles. Period. There is no question, there's no debate about that. He wrote that in as a legal term of art based on the time.
Could I ask you to go back one frame just for 1 second?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
I apologize.
I know I'm fast with the clicker. It's all right.
Focus. Thank you.
All right. But then, interestingly enough, in the 1840s, a guy named Karl Marx started writing. Okay, and I'm going to get to Karl Marx here in a little bit. Karl Marx started writing, and people started asking the question, is America really a Christian nation? So the 33rd Congress of the United States of America actually took it up as a question, are we a Christian nation? The Judiciary Committee did a full investigation, are we a Christian nation? And they actually wrote reports on this. The first report came out by Senator George Badger in 1853, quote, we are a Christian people. Then, a year later, Representative Meacham, so the House report came out, and he said this, had the people during the Revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Everybody that argues that today is going against that very sentiment. So then, a little bit later, a guy named Charles Darwin started writing. People again said, are we a Christian nation? So the United States Supreme Court took up the question this time in 1892 in the case of Holy Trinity and ruled as a matter of fact and law, quote, we are a Christian nation, end quote. So, you've got the first governing document, you've got the primary legal terms of art, you've got the founding documents, you've got the United States Congress, and you've got the United States Supreme Court all saying we're a Christian nation, and we're still debating it. But if that doesn't convince you, I hope this will. One of the things we were asked to look into was what accounted for the success, in fact, the preeminence of the West all over the world, he said. We studied everything we could from the historical, political, economic, and cultural perspective. At first we thought it was because you had more powerful guns than we had. Then we thought it was because you had the best political system. Next we focused on your economic system. So somebody's doing an investigation. What makes America great? And they're pretty exhaustive. And this is what they concluded. But in the past 20 years, we have realized that the heart of your culture is your religion, Christianity. That is why the West has been so powerful. The Christian moral foundation of social and cultural life is what made possible the emergence of capitalism. We don't have any doubt about this. The atheist communist Chinese know that we're a Christian nation.
Come on now.
Everybody else knows what time it is. We need to wake up. Look at the clock. Then you got these folks, I hear this all the time, I get these emails. Separation, haven't you heard of separation of church and state? Haven't you heard this? Aren't you ignorant sod? How come you don't know about separation of church and state? And I say, have you ever read the letter to the Danbury Baptist? Actually read the letter. So here was the original letter that this came from, this whole idea of separation of church and state. The Danbury Baptist Association wrote President Thomas Jefferson. And they said, where are you at on religious liberty? This is the actual text of the letter. Our sentiments are uniformly on the side of religious liberty. Religion is at all times and places a matter between God and individuals, that no man ought to suffer in his name, person, or effects on account of his religious opinions. And then it continues. But, sir, our constitution of government is not specific. They were worried back then. It's not specific. And these favors we receive at the expense of such degrading acknowledgments are inconsistent with the rights of free men. In other words, they were saying, you're treating this like it's a privilege, not an unalienable right given to us from God. Then they say, this is why, if you choose the right path, you're going to be reproached by people who seek power and gain on the pretense of government and religion. And then down at the bottom, if you are humble enough not to assume the prerogatives to dictate how the kingdom of Jesus Christ is run. This is the letter they wrote to the President of the United States. Okay? And this is Thomas Jefferson's response. I want to highlight the last part of it. I contemplate with sovereign reverence that the act of the whole American people, which declared that the legislature would make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Thomas Jefferson was saying the government should never get involved in the affairs of the church, not the other way around.
Right.
Completely out of context.
Right.
But most people that have read this don't know this next part, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. He addressed it again in his second inaugural address 3 years later and said this: in matters of religion, I have considered that its free exercise is placed by the Constitution independent of the powers of the general government. I have therefore undertaken on no occasion to prescribe the religious exercises suited to it, but have left them as the Constitution found them under the direction and discipline of the church or the state authorities, like state of Washington, because they actually had state churches back then. Did you guys know that?
Yeah.
Most of the colonies had state churches.
That's right, yeah.
Okay? So, conclusively disproving this idea of separation of church and state. But where does the actual phrase separation of church and state come from? In a constitution? From the former Soviet Union. I'm glad you asked. 1936 Constitution, Article 124, should separate it from the state and the school from the church.
Hello.
Thank you, Joseph Stalin. Separation of church and state comes from Joseph Stalin. So next time they say that, say, will you please stop quoting Joseph Stalin?
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because he's the greatest mass murderer
Right.
in history, along with Mao Zedong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please stop quoting mass murderers.
Thank
Okay?
you.
Atheist communism has accounted for the deaths of more people than all the Crusades and the Inquisition and everything in between. So even if you blame that on Christianity, which you can't, they've killed more. So why are you following that? Make them defend that position, please. And that brings us now to what we're facing today, the counter states. I'm going to go through this. The counter states are forces behind the scenes. We call it the deep state, other names. They're counter states. A counter state seeks to replace the existing order with a new state. They seek to replace what we have here in America. I believe it's our job to defend Christendom. I really do. I want to share this story. 1540s, my family owned a lot of property in Ireland. In fact, some would call them nobles. The English came in and they said, you need to take the O from your name. You can't be O'Shea anymore. You must be Shea. And oh, by the way, that property you thought you owned, you don't own anymore. Then in the late 1600s, they said, you can't speak Gaelic anymore. You can't own a sword anymore. You can't own a horse over 5 pounds, not in weight. Pounds was a value at that time. And oh, by the way, you can't practice your religion. Because you deserve to be slaves. Then in the 1800s and 1840s, there was a potato famine. And there was enough food, I believe, to feed the Irish people. But instead they let them starve. Several million. Nobody really knows the count. And the rest from the great diaspora are sent to America. Which is what my great-great-grandfather did and came here. And then they traveled all across the West because after the Civil War, the Irish had rioted in New York and burned a lot of it to the ground because of all the Irish casualties on the side of the Union. And went to New Ireland, a place now called Montana. I'm serious. Go look up the history books, what they called it. And the first territorial governor was an Irish hero named Thomas Francis Meagher, and his statue still stands outside of Helena today. Because they came to America, there was no place else to run. And you know what? There is no place else to run. We have to stand here.
It's true.
Now that was the Irish side of the family. Let me tell you about my wife's side of the family. In 1928 and 29, Stalin came into Ukraine, went into the towns, and he killed every single person he believed was a community leader, productive citizen, business owner, whoever he thought was going to give him trouble. It's called the Red Terror. Went in and killed everybody. That didn't pacify the people. So then he came in 30 and 31, and he burned the church in Kharkiv to the ground. Kharkiv is real close to Russia, it's in the east. Burned it to the ground. Now, where are we hearing about churches being burned? Are we hearing about that happening? This is an old Soviet communist tactic to do this. Okay? But that didn't work. So in 1932, 1933, Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of Europe, similar to the Palouse, they took all the wheat and they locked it up in storehouses. And they put guards in front of it, and millions of Ukrainians died, 7 million by some counts, called Holodomor, great starvation. And that year, Christians, and this story was relayed to me by a babushka, an old lady, Christians survived because the mice took the gleanings from the field, the little grain, put it into piles, covered it with dirt, and then the Christians ate that year. It's called the Year of the Mouse. God provided even in that harsh circumstance. Now, fast forward just 10 years, World War II, Nazis come into Ukraine. My wife's father, who passed away before we married, he's a young man at that time. And the Nazis come in, so there's Nazi sympathizers. Those Nazi sympathizers come to the farm and they say, we're taking your dairy cow. Well, that was the only thing that kept them alive. I mean, through the original hunger and then now, I mean, too. This is an important thing, to have a dairy cow. And he said, no. And they said, what do you mean no? And he got out a wooden pitchfork and he fought them off his property. Hear what I just said. A Christian took a wooden pitchfork and fought them off his property. You don't get to kill my family today. I'm not going to be complicit in your sin.
Right.
Well, the real Nazis came back, and they took him and they put him into slave labor in Germany. And later, when the Russians liberated, he was put into the Russian army. And he survived and made it back to Kharkiv, Ukraine. But the family got to keep the cow. And the family lived. And then when they were able to, they immigrated here to America for freedom. Folks, they are coming to take your cow.
Right.
They are literally, they are coming to take your cow. Are we going to let them do that, or are we going to say, no, not here, not today? The counter states. Okay, Rich Higgins, brief history of Rich Higgins. Rich Higgins was the Director of Policy and Planning for the National Security Council for the President of the United States of America. This memorandum that he wrote was given to President Trump. President Trump loved the memo. He's like, hey, this is great. Where's Rich Higgins? Sorry, sir, we fired him. What? H.R. McMaster's fired Rich Higgins. And that is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons H.R. McMaster was fired by Donald Trump. Now you know the rest of the story. Rich Higgins is the preeminent authority, probably in the world, on irregular warfare. Talking propaganda, insurgency, and he's the guy. That's why he's on the National Security Council. Right? So he wrote this memorandum to Donald Trump, and here's what he said. So, political warfare, I don't know why I do that. Political warfare is what is happening against the Trump administration. And it's understood by something called the Maoist insurgency model, and I'll get to what that is here in a second. But specifically, it's synchronized violent and nonviolent actions that focus on mobilization of individuals and groups. Is that happening in America? Are we seeing synchronization of violent and nonviolent action? Yeah. Okay. In Portland and Seattle, we're seeing it particularly. This formation of the counterstate is essential to seizing power. Okay? But look up at the top. Their goal is to demoralize all of us and make it so we don't have any hope. That's the purpose. Now, is President Trump perfect? No, he's not. Does he make a lot of mistakes? Yeah, he probably does make a lot of mistakes. But he's standing in the way of what they want to do.
Right.
It's true.
Right.
Because God put him there.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. What does that mean to us then? We better use the time we've been given.
Right.
The memo goes on. Democratic leadership is the counter-state enabler that executes, sustains, and protects the Marxist programs and facilitates their expansion. The Republicans, lacking the discernment to recognize their situation, are the designated defeat mechanism in the destruction of the old regime. Doesn't that not talk about Republican leadership? At least it does for me. I've seen this happen. The designated defeat mechanism. You're right about ready to win, and then all of a sudden everybody capitulates. You're like, what? Why?
Yeah.
I mean, the national level describes it perfectly. State level is a lot better, but national level, it describes it perfectly. So this is the Maoist insurgency model. Number one, the mass line. They have the ability to communicate one message across their entire front of organizations and groups. I've seen this happen. You could be in Florida, and you will see the same messaging on the news. Easter worshipers. West Coast, Easter worshipers. How did that happen? Where did that come from? Never heard that before. It's from the mass line. Okay? Second thing they do is something called the United Front. Islamists, Marxists, those are the two main counterstates. What they will do is they will appear on stage very frequently together. And people will say, how is it possible the Democrats are supporting the Islamists because isn't that counterintuitive, the war on women? Doesn't make any sense. Unless you're following the Maoist insurgency model and showing a united front. The next is military violence. I want to talk about this briefly. The Muslim Brotherhood in America formed something called the Special Section. That Special Section is the military arm of the Islamists in America. And we know that because it was found by the FBI and introduced into a trial. I'll get to that trial here in a bit. It was found, as a matter of fact, in law. This is the case. Then you have Antifa, the Socialist Rifle Association, Redneck Revolt. That's not my names. They came up with it. All of these are doing paramilitary training in the United States of America. Now, two things on that. There was an article that just came out this last week. A professor tracked Antifa accounts, 962 Antifa accounts.
Wow.
Conclusively linking them to the mainstream media and to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Conclusively. You can go look it up online. PJ Media has it. But here's the other interesting thing that happened. I had a reporter come up to me and say, Representative Shea, you denounce violence, and then shove the microphone on my face. And I said, of course. What are you talking about? Nobody associated with this countenancing violence. Do you denounce violence of groups like Antifa? And he refused to answer. I asked him 4 times on camera. He refused to denounce it because they're linked directly to it.
Right.
Make sure you ask these guys a question and make them defend it, because they're projecting onto us how they are themselves. There are 3 rules the social justice warriors follow, and I'll get to those here in a bit again, but it's social justice warriors always lie, they always double down on their lie, and they always project onto you how they are themselves. So for example, if they accuse somebody of Russian collusion, for example, you might want to take a look at who's saying that, and maybe that's the one colluding with Russia. All right, political warfare, propaganda. We all know what this is: deliberate label lynching and manipulation. For example, this must be a secret Christian white nationalist conspiracy to stand up for the Constitution of the United States, right? Now, how many of you knew that they actually had a meeting in Oregon, right across the border, where they decided that was going to be their tactic and strategy here just this last December, January time? They decided that's what they were going to do. Nobody's calling it out. Southern Poverty Law Center, and there's a coalition of Marxist organizations here in the western United States. And I'll get to who really is in charge of all that here in a second, but that's who's doing it. Then you have infiltration and subversion. For example, we had a guy that purported to be a friend and then started sending weird text messages. We just cut him off, right? And then he took the text message conversations that he started and then turned them over to the media saying, oh, this is really... Wait a minute, you're the guy that started it. And oh, by the way, you're the one who was saying the worst stuff, right? This is what they do intentionally. When they can't get you because you have morality and you're following the way the Lord has you and you're righteous before God and you're repenting regularly and you're humble, they got to invent stuff. That's the way they do it. Then you also have international action. OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, represents the majority countries at the United Nations. How many of you knew that? And the OIC is associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. How many of you knew that? Nobody knows that. But this explains why all these anti-Israel resolutions are coming out, right? Well, the balance of countries are represented by the Socialist International. Right? Well, now you know for sure. So, I want to highlight this specifically. This isn't just something I made up. Only a coalition of Islamists and Marxists can destroy the United States. That's Carlos the Jackal, famous terrorist. KGB boss described the Muslim world as a waiting petri dish, and that basically we had to blame everything on Israel. We being KGB. So this is Lieutenant General Mihai Pachipa. And General Pachipa is the highest-ranking defector in the United States of America. He wrote a book called Disinformation. I really believe it's a book, if you haven't read it, you really need to help understand what they're doing, how they smear the Christian church, and they have going back almost a century. But here's the important part. The Islamists are almost always Marxists.
Hello.
Hello?
I'm trying to tell people that they don't listen.
The Marxists control them, almost always. Ilyan Omar tweeted about me 3 weeks ago. Who am I? I'm just one of 3,000. What am I? Why are you paying attention to me? Well, because I'm calling it out.
That's right.
They're not paying attention to me. They're paying attention to Christ working through me and us. look at it. Before I left Romania, 4,000 agents were sent into the Islamic world. How many of you know that? From the highest ranking defector. I mean, that's pretty dispositive information, isn't it? And that's why in the Middle East, when the Matroikan archives came out, we found out and discovered that Yasser Arafat was actually a KGB agent, conclusively. How many of you knew that? And also, Ayman al-Zawahiri, number 2 of Al-Qaeda, and also a Muslim brother. And then most of the Muslim Brotherhood was infiltrated. So the Marxists control these guys. And this is the connection by General Pachipa to terrorism. Most of the terrorists actually went to KGB training camps and were trained how to hijack airplanes and then blow them up. Okay, how many of you knew that? How many of you knew some of the terrorists today were still fighting? Some of the people in ISIS were trained at KGB terror camps. Okay? Again, very clear things. And the KGB's 13th department, known as the Wet Affairs Department or Bloody Department, that's who did this specifically. Also very interesting, in General Pachipa's book, he talks about the fact that in the KGB headquarters in Moscow, they had a shrine to essentially anti-Semitism. So the spirit, let's back out of the physical for a second. The spirit behind this, you see this commonality.
Right.
Anti-Semitism and anti-Christian.
Right.
Every time you see the spirit.
Right.
So you have an anti-Christ spirit and an anti-Semitic spirit, anti-Jewish spirit. You'll see it every time.
Sure.
Okay. Some people said, oh, that's just a bunch of hogwash. And I said, well, let's be a little bit more recent. This is an FBI field report that conclusively shows that Antifa Action down in Oakland, California, went to Germany and met with members of ISIS. The FBI actually did a report on this. I think that's kind of important, don't you? It's a direct link between the two. So, let's be blunt, these are communists. And you'll notice, I don't know why it keeps flashing like that, it's weird. You'll notice this battle flag over here. See that? When you have a crosshatch like that, that is a flag of war. For those who've been, how many have been in the military? A couple? Yeah, I was in 2 for 10 years. That is a battle flag. They believe they're at war. They believe they are at war. And they're dressed like it too. All those aren't communists. Why do you keep saying that? Well, it sure looks like communists. That's the 1932 German communists, and that's the 2017 Antifa folks. Looks pretty similar, doesn't it? Not much change. They really aren't very original. This is from Spokane. Now, it's a mass murderer right there. Okay? Really? They're trying to accuse people that are Christians of all kinds of stuff. I'm not putting up posters of mass murderers, but they are. These are communists nationally. These are the groups. You'll notice a couple things. First of all, that why does that? Let's see. There we go. You'll notice that the high desert of Nevada doesn't have any communist groups. There's probably some sort of a lesson there. I don't know. They don't like the desert or something. I don't know what the deal is. But this is from Indivisible itself, their website. You'll notice that our area of the country has about the least concentration, other than that part of West Texas and Nevada. Now, I had Trevor Loudon, for those of you who don't know, he's probably one of the best experts on communism in the world, on my radio show here this last week. And he just wrote an article about this. There are 4 groups that have combined forces in America to essentially take over the Democrat Party. Okay? They are the Communist Party USA, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the Committees of Correspondence for Democratic Socialism, and then lastly, the Democrat Socialists of America, the largest Marxist organization in America. 100 U.S. representatives and 25 senators, all Democrats, either are associated, members, or sympathizers with those organizations, particularly the DSA. That's a big problem.
Don't they have their own social media like Facebook also?
Yeah, they do. They do. But these four organizations combine together and say, we're going to take over the Democrat Party. Okay? This is what it looks like in eastern Washington. You'll notice the heart of the beast there is something called the Peace Justice Action League of Spokane. They always have these nice sounding names, right? Just remember Peace Justice Action League of Spokane and look for it in your area. A similar organization, okay? It'll be something like that, Peace Action League, some permutation of it, okay? Then they always have like a Center for Justice where their lawyers are, and that's the brains of the organization. Then they have all the little spin-off organizations that change names constantly, like the Raging Grannies and everything else. All those are just support organizations. You want to look at the heart and the brains, okay? Find those two organizations, and you will find virtually every other organization in your area that is Marxist. This is an example from North Idaho. You'll see Redneck Revolt over here to the left. That, again, is the arm that is training, and this is interesting, paramilitary style, and yet they want to disarm us. Forgive me if I don't trust
Why
that.
did they hijack that name, Redneck Revolt?
I have no idea.
Deception.
Just a this links the Peace Justice Action League in Spokane to Indivisible on their page. This is linking Peace Justice Action League and Socialists of America. Just to show you that it's very easy to link these folks once you finally do it. By the way, the recent smear piece in the media was, you're doing background checks on them. I said, yeah, I'm going through the internet and finding out who these people are. Absolutely I am. I'm not going to be ashamed of that at all, because this is what I'm finding. These are people that want to destroy this country. Absolutely. I took an oath. I'm still upholding it.
Amen.
So this Peace Justice Action League, just again, examples, had a conference in 2016 and 2015. In 2016, the moderator was Sean Vestal, and they had the Council of American Islamic Relations, Arslan Bukhari. Okay? 2015, they had Judith LeBlanc. 2017, Lisa Brown, who ran for Congress against Kathy McMorris Rogers, was the keynote speaker. Okay? Now we're linking across. But look at this. Who is Judith LeBlanc? Anybody know? Anybody know who Judith LeBlanc is? She's a leader of the Communist Party USA. That's important. Isn't it important that a person who's running for Congress went to the same organization who had that person as a keynote speaker? I think so. How about Sean Vestal? Well, I'm glad you asked. He's a reporter for the Socialist Review. They've earned that title now. The Spokesman Review, otherwise known as. Then I called this out, and he wrote me this message. It is incorrect that I've ever given any money to PJALs. And I said, well, Sean, that's your name right there on their donor list, isn't it? And he stopped writing me. He kept smearing me in the paper, right? Because they called him out. You're linked directly to the Communist Party USA and the Council of American Islamic Relations, both counter states. In one fell swoop, you're linked. And you're trying to deny it. So, this statue on the left is Vladimir Lenin. You'll notice the red on his hands. In downtown Seattle and Fremont. And that cross is in Colville, Washington. Thank you, Pastor Cummings. I want to tell a story. My wife, from Kharkiv, Ukraine, when the latest round of troubles happened in Ukraine, the Christian churches in Kharkiv, because it's in the east, it's the largest city in the east, second largest city in Ukraine. All the Christians, regardless of denomination, went down to the town square every morning and they prayed together for peace over their city. And guess which city never fell to the Russians? Kharkiv, Ukraine. So as they're praying in this town square, overshadowing their prayer meetings is this gigantic statue of Vladimir Lenin. So they're like, that probably needs to go. So they took it down. And what did they put in its place? A cross. What are we doing in America? We're taking down our crosses and putting up statues of Vladimir Lenin. No wonder the rest of the world's like, what are you doing? It's craziness. But there it is in black and white. Now, on the left you'll notice, right here, that's a communist flag. It was unfurled at the state capitol in Olympia. I took that picture, and as soon as I started taking the pictures, they put it away. But this was during the March for Life rally in 2018. You'll also notice at Antifa Action, nobody gives you power, you just take it, February 25th, 2018. If anybody on our side ever said that, my goodness, it'd be a national news story. Wouldn't it?
Yep.
But it gets even more interesting. How many of you heard that Antifa was investigated just last month for plotting an armed rebellion in the United States of America and running guns from cartels in Mexico across the border to do it?
Well, why did they arrest him?
Precisely.
And I would say they did run the guns.
And what happened to the story? Because it was only up for a couple of days.
It was buried.
Exactly.
This is actually a website. I know who runs this. And it was buried. But Representative Shea having a Liberty State rally, that's news. It's still, secret conspiracy. Give me a break. These guys are openly doing this, and this is getting no attention. And every legislator affiliated with Antifa and Olympia, if their standard is to investigate Christians for having a Dominion sticker on their computer, perhaps we should investigate them for their links to Antifa, because there were 2 legislative aides walking around with pins on.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Nothing happened to them. These are some of the things that I got in the last 2 months. These are death threats. People say these don't happen, but I wanted to put them up to prove to you they did not owe me something. Poor Matt, no. I want you to see this. This is what these people really believe. And notice this one at the bottom. You and all your Nazi friends and family must be eliminated from the face of the earth. Somebody needs to go back and read what the Nazis did.
Right.
Right? Saying that, you're saying effectively that you're the Nazi.
Insert your arms and
Isn't that interesting?
Hmm.
You and all your Nazi friends should be eliminated from the face of the earth. Think about that. Think about it. Here's another one. None of this ever made the media. Why? Because it doesn't fit their narrative. It does not fit their narrative. What are the roots of communism? Well, I'm glad you asked. How about this book that was written by Karl Marx, A World Without Jews? How many times do you hear that brought up? Does anybody hear that brought up? No? Communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality. So going back to what Pastor Cummings was saying earlier, it abolishes all morality, right? Now, most of you have never read that, but I want to highlight a few more things that he has written. But first I'm going to go to Saul Alinsky. How many of you knew that he dedicated his Rules for Radicals to Lucifer?
Yep.
Black and white. And the IAF, that stands for the Industrial Areas Foundation, which is still training Marxists in the United States to this day. Still, to this day. Same people that tried to recruit Pastor Cummings, still training to this day. Here's what Karl Marx wrote. I'm not going to read this, okay, but I want you to read it. I will read one part down at the bottom, because he admits his ideas are from Satan. His ideas are from evil. Thus heaven I forfeited, I know it full well. My soul once true to God is chosen for hell. That's his poem called The Pale Maiden. Communism and socialism is rooted, its very core, in evil and a spirit. It's anti-Christ and anti-Jewish. Eugenics. I talked about Ireland earlier. This is just some of the proof of it. That set of statues on the right is in downtown Dublin about the starvation in Ireland, and then to the left about the starvation in Ukraine. Why? Because these elites in communism and socialism believe they know better. They alone are the ones ones worthy of life, not all of you. And it doesn't matter, Ukraine, Irish, doesn't matter. You're not worthy. And yet they would have us believe they're the compassionate ones. And they still talk about we need to reduce the world's population. This is from Darwin's book, The Descent of Man. Now, the origin of the species. I want to get into this. Do you know what the original title of The Origin of the Species was? The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. How many of you knew that? A few, but that's the title of the book. So it was The Origin of the Species, which is all you ever see in the media today. What's the rest of the title say? The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. It was a racist book, an actual race, and they used that as one of their primary documents to back their worldview. And then he writes this, The Descent of Man. So this isn't a one-off or a mistake. At some future period not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of men will almost certainly exterminate and replace throughout the world the savage races. The break will then be rendered wider, for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we may hope, and the Caucasian and some ape as low as the baboon, instead of, as at present, between a Negro or Australian or the gorilla. Is that taught in our schools that he was that bigoted? No.
Nope.
But this is the basis of eugenics. This same idea was used by the Nazi Germans as an excuse to exterminate the Jews. It's the same thing. And oh, by the way, Margaret Sanger, who founded Planned Parenthood, used the same eugenics idea to help start abortion clinics where first? In the black communities in the inner city. Same spirit, different time. Antonio Gramsci, who is known as kind of the great strategist of the socialist, the Fabian socialist. And for those of you who don't know where Fabianism comes from, when Hannibal came across the Alps and attacked the Roman legions, he beat them, but he never drove them into the sea, so the Roman legions regrouped and started essentially a guerrilla war over a period of years and eventually defeated Hannibal. And it was by Fabius Maximus. Fabian socialism is the idea of incrementally chipping away at a culture. And so Antonio Gramsci said, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of the schools. Does that happen?
Yep.
The universities, does that happen? The media,
Yep.
has that happened? The churches, does that happen? It has. It has. And just to highlight again more sources, Belladonna testified before the United States Congress about the infiltration of the Catholic Church by the Soviets. Catholic priests, Marxists, and I'm sorry, but it's true, the Pope is a Marxist. And the Matroikin archives, they laid out conclusively the infiltration of the Marxists into government. General Pachipa, as I've already talked about, into the schools and the media, and into the Islamists. And then Yuri Bezmenov lays out how these people operate. And I believe we're at stage 3, or right between stage 2 and stage 3, where they want to create enough violence into this next election cycle, being the worst election cycle we probably have seen in our lifetimes, to foment chaos and then ride in on the white horse of socialism, actually the red horse of socialism, right? And say, oh, we need more government, actually. Then you have the explanatory memorandum, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Saul Alinsky very clearly said we believe in Machiavellianism. In other words, the end justifies the means. Doesn't matter. And he actually wrote that in the Rules for Radicals. I actually had to read the Rules for Radicals. It's awful. But interesting, in that book, he actually corroborates Belladonna and infiltration of the Catholic Church. Because he said members of the Chicago Seminary came to him to learn. Priests. And he actually says it in the Rules for Radicals. He admits it. So what do they use? They use something called the Hegelian dialectic, or deciding truth. Truth is an absolute, right? And this is where you can really defeat people in debates. When they say, whatever the stance is, well, you shouldn't judge. By whose standard? Who says? Who says? Why? Make them answer those questions, because ultimately they have to come down and say, well, because I said.
Right.
And that never can hold, right? And this is how they work. They introduce, you'll have a thesis or the truth that exists, okay? And they introduce something called an antithesis, or the opposite of truth. So let's take marriage. Marriage is between one man and one woman. No, actually it's not. It can be with a dolphin or multiple people, or whatever. Here's the antithesis. Okay? But we're not going to go to the dolphin part yet, okay? We're going to compromise at domestic partnerships. People are like, oh, okay. You guys will stop then, right? And then that becomes the new truth. And then they say, well, domestic partnerships isn't enough. We need marriage. Well, that's not enough. Now we need polygamy or whatever, polyamory. Vicky, you know better than I do. Whatever. Multiple people in a marriage. That's it. And then, if you want to marry your dog or your dolphin, that's the next. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And they keep moving us over to the side. We have to say, no. Dressing up like a demon and going into a library at drag queen hour and scaring our kids is wrong. And I believe that's wrong. That's the standard set by Scripture. That's the standard I'm standing on.
Right.
We're founded on Judeo-Christianity in our culture, and it's wrong. And I'm not going to budge one single inch off it. That's the right answer. Because if we don't give ground, then they can't move.
Right.
We talked about this, how the SJWs operate. I want to talk about something down there called the Delphi technique. They will bring people into a community meeting, and they will put in place a facilitator. The facilitator's job is to get you to come to their predetermined conclusion. Okay, and so they'll have, they'll identify the troublemakers. They're like, okay, you're the troublemakers. I got you on my radar screen, and they'll try to isolate you. Oh well, everybody else kind of doesn't believe it. Thank you for your opinion. They'll do that kind of head patting thing, right? And eventually, everybody agrees that we should do whatever. And they're like, how did we get there? Right? And the way to break that up, actually, the technique to break it up, is you put all your people on the outside of the place, and then it makes it seem like the whole room is on your side. Okay? That's the way to break the Delphi technique. And then start asking them questions and make them justify their decisions and positions. And you will see very quickly that they'll disband the meeting, and we need to seek more input in a different medium or a different venue or something, right? That's how you bust the Delphi technique. So I wanted to highlight that right now. They also will say, you're the only one complaining. It's just you. When it's really not. It's a whole bunch of people. All right. Cloud Piven, Pastor Cummings actually brought this up earlier. They want to overwhelm our social safety net and destroy it.
Yeah.
And then come in and it's actually called, it was a strategy by Andrew Cloward and Francis Fox Piven. It's all over, you can read it for yourself. And then come in and say, okay, now we need single-payer health care, or one of the things being now discussed, will it be a universal basic income? Okay? This is where they're going with it, right? In other words, universal basic slavery. Deep Green Resistance, they actually write in their own books how they're going to do it. This comes from the Deep Green Resistance. You'll notice civil disobedience, mutiny, and insubordination. Is that happening under the Trump administration? Insubordination.
Yep.
Of course it is. The deep state's doing it, right? But when they're done with that stage, then they move over to this, which is property and material destruction. Is that happening in Portland sometimes?
Yes.
It is. Then they move to violence against humans. Okay? So that tells you where they're at in the little stages. This is from their own books, not mine. Okay? All right, right now we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back in, and please make it an actual 5 minutes, okay? Turkish or Ottoman Caliphate had existed hundreds and hundreds of years before that. But after World War II, when they lost, he disbanded the Caliphate. In 1928, Hassan al-Banna formed the Muslim Brotherhood with the express purpose of reinstating the Caliphate. I want you to remember, it's a key part of history. He wanted to reinstate the Caliphate. And I will explain a little bit later a lot of where this stuff comes from in the world. But first, it's this region. You'll notice Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, the Uyghur province in China. All of those are Turkic-speaking peoples. They're related to Turkey, okay, the former Ottoman Empire. Right now, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan are all in talks to form a super country over there. Okay? Why? Well, because there's a lot of oil that comes from that area of the world, and most of it will flow through Turkey. Turkey is also closely aligning now with China, and China is aligning with Turkey to buy peace on its western frontier. Does it make sense now? A little bit? Okay? So the Chinese have that Turkey-speaking people that they want to buy off. So I think they've invested something like $170 million or something, and Turkey is moving into the sphere of China and Russia. Okay, Muslim Brotherhood nationally. These are the mosques in America, which is automatic. And notice our area of the country has the least amount of mosques. And if you split Washington and Oregon down the middle on the Cascade Mountains, this actually holds true. Okay? You'll notice that it corresponds almost exactly with where the terrorist acts have occurred in the United States of America. This comes to us from the Investigative Project Terrorism, a bunch of great former law enforcement and intelligence guys that work on this. So here it is again. Pretty interesting, isn't it? Okay. All right, Sharia law. We're going to talk about a few things. First of all, there is no substantive true difference on Sharia between Sunni and Shia. Okay? When I was in Iraq, the sheikh, who I worked with quite a bit, was a Shia, and his wife was Sunni. Okay? Pretty important that you understand this. The media tries to make this a divide bigger than it probably is. They will unite against who they perceive as aggressors, usually the West. Number two, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Ayatollah Khomeini have never inaccurately quoted the Quran or Islamic law. Never one time. You'll never see Islamic scholars say, oh no, that's not right. What they instead will say is, oh, there's moderate Muslims, and we'll get to that here in a second. Islamic law, the Quran. There's something called the Tafsir ibn Kathir, which is a verse-by-verse explanation of the Quran. Okay? Then you have the Hudud, which is the criminal law or mandatory punishments in the Quran. Okay? Then you have the Sunnah, which has the Sirah and the Hadiths. The Sirah was the biography of Muhammad's life. Okay? Things that he did. The Hadiths were observations about Muhammad's life outside of it. And there was actually, I think, tens and tens of thousands of them. And two primary scholars took all those tens of thousands and whittled them down to, I think, 9,000, 8,000, something like that. And that's Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Okay? So they took those observations and they whittled them down and created those additions to the Quran. Okay? Does it make sense? So these are observations of his life. The Reliance of the Traveler is effectively a summary of all that Islamic law, which is in the Sunnah and in the Quran. Okay? And then they took that and they boiled it down. And Al-Azhar University is the gold standard for Islamic law. It effectively is the Harvard of Islamic law. Okay? It is the gold standard of Sunni Orthodox Islam. Okay, other key works. On Jihad, Hassan al-Banna, or the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, wrote that. Jihad in Islam, Milestones by Sayyid Qutb. And Sayyid Qutb's work is very important because that's what's used by a majority of jihadis today, Milestones. And it is effectively how to radicalize people. Okay? You also have the Quranic Concepts of War, which was put out by a general in Pakistan, Methodology of Dawah in America, and then also What Islam is All About, which is the primary textbook teaching Islam in America today. Remember that last one. Okay? Moderate Islam. The term moderate Islam is ugly and offensive. There is no moderate Islam. Islam is Islam. That's the Turkish PM. It's very important because he has effectively become the poster boy, or the person that the Muslim Brotherhood is championing to become the next caliph. They want to restart it in Turkey. Now, I'm going to stop there for a second. Fethullah Gulen. It's a name that kind of sounds weird, but a couple of years ago it was very prominent after the coup in Turkey. You remember when that happened on the news? There was a coup in Turkey. And they blamed it on Fethullah Gulen, who had already been exiled to the United States. What was not said was that Recep Erdogan and Fethullah Gulen were actually buddies. They were part of a secret society whose expressed goal was to reestablish the caliphate in Turkey. Fethullah Gulen was exiled to the United States of America because of that. Erdogan, instead, he rose to prominence and power. And then when the coup happened, he blamed it on Fethullah Gulen, when it really was probably the last remnants of the secular army in Turkey. And then said, I killed two birds with one stone. Does it make sense? Now recently, the Muslim Brotherhood has effectively given its imprimatur on Erdogan to be the next caliph. So when he says this is a very important thing. But just to reinforce the point, they actually did a survey of how many Muslims want Sharia law. 648 million out of 893 million. That is a significant majority. Okay? There's no such thing as moderate Islam. And I want to make sure that we've got the sound good now. Okay, I want you to watch this. Oh, is it? It worked earlier.
It's not coming through into the board. I've got the road signal here. I think I'm not got road signal right here. How it's
Then, this is the Cedar Riverside neighborhood of Minneapolis. It's known for the University of Minnesota, phenomenal ethnic food, and the export of American fighters to the terrorist groups ISIS and Al-Shabaab. In fact, it's reported that dozens of young Muslims from this community have gone to fight for these organizations. So we hit the street to find out what is going on. Is it easy to be Muslim in America? Or is it hard?
It's easy.
It's easy to be Muslim.
Yeah.
Nobody gives you problems.
No, it's no problem.
And you can go to school here, obviously.
Yeah.
And the kids, are they good to you? Are they nice to you? Is it tough? Is it tough?
Oh yeah. It's not tough.
It's not tough at all.
No.
This is a free country. That's the beauty of it. So we love America. I mean, it's a great country. Freedom of speech, freedom of choice of your religion.
Right.
So we don't have any issues.
Do you feel more comfortable living under American law, or do you feel more comfortable living under Sharia law?
Sharia law.
I'm a Muslim. I prefer Sharia law.
Sharia law, yes.
You prefer Sharia law over American law?
Of course, yeah. Of course, yeah.
And do you find most of your friends feel the same way?
Yeah, of course, if you're Muslim, yeah.
Sharia law says if he steals, they come after him. So basically, they can leave their doors open. Nobody's gonna steal anything because the Sharia is so tight. Usually, they don't do anything. The smallest things usually have big consequences.
And he can make his daughter marry somebody.
Yeah, he can. Yeah, he can. He has the authority,
Authority.
Yeah, to do that. Yeah.
So here, how young do you think it's okay?
Yeah, 15.
How do you feel when this whole controversy with the Prophet Muhammad and people depicting the Prophet in cartoons, how does the whole thing make you feel?
That really pisses me off, you know what I mean? Because they know it's a button to push.
I love makes me angry. It's just that everyone gets like the big freedom, and then they don't see that the freedom that they're getting is causing a problem it's casting hatred for other people.
Would it be better if we made it illegal in America to make fun of the Prophet Muhammad?
Definitely, yeah.
Do you think we should make a law that makes it illegal to
That would be better, yeah. That would be better. To stop, aggression.
I was so upset and I was so mad. They insulted our religion, they insulted our prophet, and we couldn't take it.
and they shouldn't be allowed to do that?
Oh my God, big time, yes.
Do you understand the motivation behind the people then who strike out violently against people who depict the Prophet Muhammad?
Yeah, I understand totally where you're coming from.
You understand why they feel motivated to do that?
Yes, because when you every day face frustration and every day you have you're mad or somebody say that or you feel hate yourself. Do anything you want. You commit suicide. You don't care because your heart is telling you I don't want to live no more because you couldn't take that much hate or you kill someone.
In a way, they kind of deserve it.
No, every action has a consequence.
Is it right to kill somebody who insults Muhammad?
Yeah, because she is just, she had the religion, I understand. But she shouldn't beat up the prophet, you know?
Do you understand why people would want to attack her?
Yeah.
You have a choice. Would you rather live here or would you rather live in a Muslim country?
I'd rather live in a Muslim country with my people.
Would you prefer to live in America or prefer to live in Somalia?
For me, I think it's Somalia.
You prefer to live in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
Would you rather live in America or live in Somalia?
I would rather live in Somalia.
I'm not Americanized. I just speak fluent and I'm articulate and I can articulate what I'm trying to say. That's about it. But other than that, as far as my culture and my preferences and everything, it's still Somali.
Even though here you have all the freedom and stuff like that?
And even though I have all the freedom,
I think life might be better in Somalia than here.
because now you have the freedom of it, of practicing your religion while working and doing your other things.
Wow. Wow? Wow. All right, so there is only one interpretation of Islam. There's a reliance of the traveler. And you'll notice on the page, you see that thing up at the top. And then I'll go through this a little bit. We certify the above-mentioned translation corresponds to the Arabic original. There's no objection to printing and circulating it. This is saying that what's in the reliance of the traveler can be relied upon as orthodox Sunni law. That's the stamp of Al-Azhar, just to prove its authenticity. Now, they actually had a conference in the Nordic countries where they said very clearly there's only one interpretation of Islam. This is in their own words.
Can we have this camera focusing on all the audience, sir? Can we have this camera focusing on all the audience? Because every now and then, every time we have a conference, every time we invite a speaker, they always can come with the same accusations. This speaker supports death penalty for homosexuals. This speaker supports death penalty for this crime or this crime, that he is homophobic, they subjugate women, etc., etc., etc. It's the same old stuff coming all the time. And we always try to tell them, I always try to tell them that, look, it's not that speaker that we're inviting who has these extreme radical views, as you say. These are general views that every Muslim actually has. Every Muslim believes in these things. Just because they're not telling you about it, just because they're not out there in the media doesn't mean they don't believe in them. So I will ask you, everyone in the room, how many of you are normal Muslims? You're not extremists, you're not radical, this is normal Sunni Muslims. Please raise your hands. Everybody, mashallah.
Notice the one guy not raising his hand.
Okay, take down your hands again. How many of you agree that men and women should sit separate? Please raise your hands. Everyone agrees. Everyone agrees. Brother, so it's not just these radical sheikhs then. Allahu Akbar. Next question. How many of you agree that the punishments described in the Quran and the Sunnah, whether it is death, whether it is stoning for adultery, whatever it is, if it is from Allah and His Messenger, that is the best punishment ever possible for humankind. And that is what we should apply in the world. Who agrees with that?
Okay.
Allahu Akbar. Are you all radical extremists? SubhanAllah.
Notice what he said. All the punishments. Okay, remember that. He said that. Let's talk first about abrogation. For those of you, you might know about this. There's a lot better speakers out there who have talked about this, but abrogation effectively is the older verses of the Quran have been abrogated or replaced and supplemented by newer verses in the Quran. And this is the verses in the Quran that actually say that abrogation is part of their doctrine. So what does that mean? Here's the surahs in chronological order. Let there be no compulsion in religion. We'll see in Medina, it was one of the older verses, and it was replaced by that. Take not Jews and Christians for your friends and protectors. You'll notice again, older verse, whoever seeks religion other than Islam will never have to have it accepted of him. Then that's replaced by the surah of the sword, fight and slay the unbelievers wherever you find them, and lie away from them in the strategy of war. So these newer verses are what are dispositive in Islamic law. So when they try to say, oh, and they cite this older verse of the Quran, it's not true. Now the Quran is confusing because it's organized not by old and new verses, it's organized by biggest and smallest verses. So you don't have it. That's why I put this up here so you can understand it. And then lastly, fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, even if they are people of the book. Who are people of the book?
We are.
We are. Okay? Now here are some of these punishments that everybody should agree with. Crucifixion and beheading. These are punishments in the Hudud that they agree with. Now, what gets you your head cut off, and by the way, everybody knows in the book of Revelation it says that believers who are beheaded, right? Okay, what gets it? Blasphemy and causing mischief and corruption in the land. Does anybody know what mischief and corruption in the land is? Preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. Will get you crucified or beheaded. Isn't that interesting? Now, in the reliance of the traveler, it is ijma to speak against Islam or to say that any of those verses are not correct. So you will never see speakers saying, oh, the reliance of the traveler is wrong. Because it's ijma. That's actually punishable by some bad stuff, right? Okay. Now, I'm going to tie this up here in a neat little bow here in a second, but I want you to listen to this. The Muslim Student Association is on virtually every college campus in America, and this is their Pledge of Allegiance, and it's probably not going to be familiar to you, okay?
And we want to say to the brothers and sisters who are here, you know, we have brothers and sisters who are here today amongst us, and some of their family is like locked up on secret evidence, and we say to y'all, hang in there, hang in there. And we will continue to make the thing free. And don't give up. And we have to embrace it and not kick them to the curb. We have to embrace that. Y'all go back and get to work. We will end with the Pledge of Allegiance. And so you will repeat after me, inshallah. Allah is my Lord. Islam is my life. The Quran is my guide. The Sunnah is my practice. Jihad is my spirit. Righteousness is my character, and paradise is my goal. For I enjoin what is right, I forbid what is wrong, I will fight against oppression, and I will die to establish Islam. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, there is the Pledge of Allegiance of the Muslim Brotherhood next to the Muslim Student Association that you just heard. Now I want to highlight one part. Jihad is my spirit. That's what he said, right? Yeah. Okay, so what is jihad? I'm glad you asked. The Alliance of the Traveler defines jihad and defines it, as warfare against non-Muslims. Okay, so who are non-Muslims? Okay, Christians. Okay, so Jihad is his spirit. So warfare against non-Muslims is his spirit. Okay, so warfare against Christians is his spirit. Okay, so warfare against Christ is his spirit. Who does that describe? Okay, pretty clear, isn't it?
Yeah.
Black and white. And I'll show you where it is in the Last of the Traveler here in a second. Here's a British translation of the Quran. You'll also notice here, it's very interesting. When they published this, they said, oh, Thomas Jefferson, in modern times, now Thomas Jefferson he read the Quran, so he was respecting it. It's not why he read the Quran. And oh, by the way, it's not what the Quran translation says. Because in the cover, it says this: it may happily flatter thee to find him to speak English, as if it came from no conqueror nation, but thou wilt soon reject that fear if they consider this Quran. And you'll see up at the top, there being many sects and heresies banded together against the truth being Christianity, finding that of Muhammad wanting. So he was writing this translation of the Quran by saying it's a heresy. So here's a translation so you can know what the heresy is. And that's why Thomas Jefferson had it, was to understand them because they were at war. Here it is. That thou mayest the better prepare to encounter and hope overcome them through Jesus Christ. So when they say Thomas Jefferson read the Quran, that was the Quran he read, and that was in the front cover of it. Okay? This is also what it says as being ridiculous as their text. It's pretty unflattering, isn't it? Here's another one. Such absurdities have infected the best part of the world. This book, the Quran, will render that law contemptible. And there it is again. That was in John Adams' library copy as well.